It was late in the evening when Sarah first saw the post online. She was scrolling through her phone, as she often did after a long day, when a photo of a sad blind dog caught her eye. The German Shepherd, named Max, sat in a shelter cage, looking lost and alone. His dark eyes stared out, unseeing but full of emotion. The caption beneath the photo told the heartbreaking story. Max had been abandoned after his family moved away. He had lost his sight over time due to an accident, and now he was living in a cold, unfamiliar place. Sarah's heart ached when she read the post. She had always loved animals, especially dogs, and the idea of a blind dog being left alone in a shelter was too much for her to ignore. She clicked on the link to learn more about him. The shelter described Max as a gentle dog, but he was afraid of new people. They said that because of his blindness, he was having a hard time adjusting to life there. He needed a home where someone could offer him the love and care he deserved. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Max. She had a special place in her heart for rescue dogs, and she knew that she couldn't leave him in that shelter, especially knowing how hard it was for blind dogs to find homes. Her mind raced. Could she give Max the life he needed? Could she help him find peace after everything he'd been through? After a lot of thought, Sarah made up her mind. The next morning, she called the shelter. She spoke to the manager, asking if Max was still available for adoption. The manager confirmed that he was. She told Sarah that Max was very shy and would likely need a lot of time to adjust. "Are you sure you're ready for a dog like him?" the manager asked. "I'm sure," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the nerves she felt inside. "I've rescued dogs before. I can help him." Sarah made arrangements to meet Max the very next day. As she drove to the shelter, her heart raced. She was excited, but also a little scared. What if Max didn't like her? What if he was too afraid to trust her? When she arrived, a staff member led her to Max's kennel. He was sitting in the back corner, his ears perked up at the sound of her footsteps. He didn't bark or jump up, but Sarah could see that he was aware of her presence. The shelter worker spoke softly to Max, calling him over. Slowly, he stood and walked toward her, his steps cautious, but determined. Max stopped just a few feet away from Sarah and sat down. She could see the hesitation in his eyes as he sniffed the air around her, trying to make sense of the situation. He was nervous, but he didn't back away. Sarah reached out her hand slowly, giving him the chance to decide if he wanted to approach her. After a few seconds, he moved closer and gently sniffed her hand. Sarah's heart melted. She had been worried that he wouldn't trust her, but here he was, showing her a sign of willingness. She spoke softly to him, her voice gentle and calming. "It's okay, Max. I'm here to help you." The shelter worker smiled. "It's good that he's responding to you. He's been through a lot." Sarah crouched down, and Max moved closer, nudging her hand with his nose. The connection between them was immediate. She could tell that Max was unsure, but he was also curious. He was taking a chance on her, and Sarah knew this was the moment. After spending a few minutes with him, Sarah made her decision. "I'll take him," she said with a smile. The shelter worker nodded and began making arrangements to get Max ready for the trip. On the way home, Max sat quietly in the backseat of Sarah's car, his body tense but calm. Sarah drove slowly, speaking to him now and then, reassuring him that everything would be okay. She was nervous too, but more than anything, she was filled with hope. She was about to give Max a new life, and she was determined to make it the best life possible for him. When they finally arrived at her house, Sarah opened the car door and gently helped Max out. He hesitated for a moment, then took his first step onto the grass. Sarah could see him sniffing the air, trying to make sense of his new surroundings. She knelt down next to him, offering him her hand once more. "Welcome home, Max," she whispered softly, smiling as he took another step forward. This was just the beginning of their journey together. The first night in Sarah's house was quiet. Max seemed unsure of where he was and what was happening. Sarah gently led him into the living room and helped him settle down on a soft blanket near the fireplace. The house smelled like fresh flowers and home-cooked meals. Comforting, peaceful smells. But to Max, it was all unfamiliar. Max lay down, but he didn't close his eyes. Instead, he kept them open, staring into space as if waiting for something to happen. Sarah sat down nearby, watching him carefully. She could tell he was nervous. His ears twitched at every small noise, and every once in a while, his head would turn sharply, as if trying to find something or someone. But there was no one there. She knew it would take time for Max to get used to his new home. He was blind, so the world around him must have been a confusing place. But Sarah was patient. She spoke softly to him, trying to comfort him with her voice. "You're safe here, Max. You don't have to be afraid." Max didn't respond, but Sarah noticed that he slowly began to relax. His body wasn't as stiff, and he stretched out, his legs reaching toward the warmth of the fire. But he still didn't close his eyes, as though he was watching for something, waiting for it to make sense. After a while, Sarah stood up and walked quietly to the kitchen. Max heard her footsteps and turned his head slightly in her direction. She smiled softly at him. It was a small sign that he was paying attention to her, even if he couldn't see her. As she got a glass of water, she talked to him from the other room, letting him know where she was. She didn't want him to feel alone. That night, Sarah placed a soft bed near the couch for Max. She gently led him to it, and he hesitated for a moment before lying down. His body was tense, his tail tucked close to his body. Sarah stroked his fur softly, trying to soothe him. She felt his warmth under her hand, and even though he didn't show it, she knew that he was starting to trust her, little by little. Max didn't sleep that night. Sarah could hear his breathing, short, fast breaths, as if he was worried about something. He stayed still for hours, staring into the darkness. Sarah stayed up for a while, not wanting to leave him alone. She knew he was adjusting to so many changes. It was difficult for her too, because she wanted to help him more than anything. The next morning, Sarah woke up early. She stretched and looked over at Max. He was still lying on his bed, but he had shifted slightly, as though he had tried to get more comfortable. She smiled, glad to see that he was settling in. Max seemed to be more at ease that morning. When Sarah stood up, he followed her with his ears, turning his head toward the sound of her movements. Sarah walked slowly to the kitchen, and Max followed her, his paws tapping softly against the floor. He didn't stumble as much as he had the day before, and Sarah noticed that he was starting to learn the layout of the house. He knew where the door was, where the furniture was, and even where the food bowl was placed. Sarah took her time, making a bowl of food for Max. As she placed it on the floor, he approached cautiously. Max sniffed the food, then took a small step forward. It was clear that he wasn't sure about the food at first, but after a few seconds, his nose twitched, and he started to eat. Sarah watched him with a soft smile. It was the first sign of trust she had seen from him. He was beginning to feel more comfortable in his new home. Over the next few days, Max slowly began to find his way around. He started to recognize certain sounds, like the jingling of Sarah's keys or the sound of the front door opening. He would walk to the door, his head held high, his tail wagging just a little bit. Max still had his moments of uncertainty, but Sarah could see that he was starting to trust his new surroundings and the person who was giving him a second chance. It wasn't always easy for Max. There were times when he bumped into things or hesitated before making a move. But each time, Sarah was there to guide him, speaking gently to him, telling him everything was okay. She knew it would take time, but she was willing to be patient because she understood that healing wasn't something that could happen overnight. Every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory, and she was ready to celebrate those victories with him. Days turned into weeks, and Max continued to adjust to his new life with Sarah. While there were still moments when he seemed unsure, there were also small victories, little signs that he was beginning to trust Sarah more and more. One morning, Sarah woke up to find Max already sitting near the front door, waiting for her. His tail wagged gently, and his ears perked up when he heard her footsteps. For the first time, he seemed calm, not fearful or anxious. He knew what the morning meant. It was time for their daily walk. Sarah smiled as she walked over to him, kneeling down to his level. "Are you ready for your walk, Max?" she asked, her voice soft and encouraging. Max didn't bark, but he gently nudged her hand, as if to say, "Yes, I'm ready." Sarah clipped the leash onto Max's collar and opened the door. The fresh morning air filled the room as Max stood up and stepped outside, his paws touching the cool grass. He sniffed the air, his nose twitching, taking in the new smells. For a brief moment, he stood still, as though trying to figure out the world outside. But then he started walking, leading the way. Sarah was surprised. Max, who had only just arrived at her home, was now confidently stepping forward, his steps steady and sure. She followed him, amazed at how quickly he was adjusting. The more she watched him, the more she realized that Max wasn't just following her. He was taking the lead. It was as though he had memorized the layout of the yard already, knowing where the flowers were, where the small rocks were scattered, and where the big oak tree stood. Max walked in a slow, steady pace, never stumbling. He didn't bump into anything like he used to. It was almost as if he could sense the world around him with his other senses. His nose was always moving, his ears swiveling at every sound. Max may not have had his sight, but he had learned to navigate the world with his other abilities. As they walked together, Sarah felt a deep connection to Max. It was clear to her that he wasn't just learning how to live in a new environment. He was finding ways to thrive despite his blindness. He wasn't letting it stop him from enjoying life. And Sarah could see that he was beginning to trust her. He was starting to believe that she wouldn't leave him, that she would always be there to guide him through the challenges. After their walk, Sarah sat down on the porch, and Max joined her. He laid down beside her, his head resting on his paws, his eyes calm. Sarah reached out and stroked his fur. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into her touch, a quiet sign that he was beginning to understand what it meant to be loved. She smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart. It had taken time, but Max was beginning to let down his guard. That afternoon, Sarah decided to try something new. She set up a small obstacle course in the backyard using some simple objects, chairs, blankets, and a few toys. She wanted to see how Max would react, to see if he could use his other senses to navigate it. She wasn't sure how he would do, but she was hopeful. When Sarah called Max over to the start of the course, he tilted his head to one side. He could sense something was different. Sarah gently guided him to the first obstacle, a low chair. Max paused for a moment, then walked slowly toward it. He bumped into the chair, then stopped. Sarah was ready to help, but Max didn't need her. He took a step back, sniffed the air, and then carefully walked around the chair. It was a small victory, but to Sarah, it felt huge. Max was showing her that he could figure things out, that he was willing to try. She cheered him on softly, and Max wagged his tail in response. They continued through the course, with Max confidently navigating each obstacle, trusting his instincts and his senses. By the end of the course, Max had made it through without any help at all. He had done it on his own. Sarah's heart swelled with pride. Max was no longer the scared, unsure dog he had been when he first arrived. He was growing stronger, more confident with each passing day. Sarah had always believed in him, but now she saw that he was starting to believe in himself too. She sat down beside him again, her hand resting on his back. "You did great, Max," she whispered. Max looked up at her, his eyes soft and trusting. For the first time, Sarah saw a real spark of happiness in him. It was a small but powerful moment, a sign that Max was beginning to heal. And in that moment, Sarah knew that their journey together was just beginning. There would still be challenges ahead, but with each new step, Max was showing her that he was ready to face them with courage, and together, they could do anything. As the weeks passed, something strange started happening with Max. At first, Sarah didn't notice it right away, but then it became impossible to ignore. Max was changing in ways she couldn't fully explain. His confidence grew even more, but there was something else, a quiet energy that seemed to radiate from him. Every day, Max seemed more in tune with his surroundings. It wasn't just that he was learning to navigate the house and yard. It was something deeper. He started to behave differently, almost as if he knew things before they happened. Max was blind, so it was impossible for him to see the things that were around him, but somehow he always seemed to know what was going on. It was almost as if he could sense things in a way that Sarah didn't fully understand. One evening, Sarah was sitting on the couch reading a book when Max suddenly jumped up and ran to the door. He stood still for a moment, his ears perked, his body tense. Sarah looked up from her book, confused. "What's wrong, Max?" she asked, but Max didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at the door, waiting. Sarah's heart began to race. She had never seen him act like this before. He was so still, so focused. He didn't seem afraid, just aware of something. After a few minutes, Sarah got up and walked over to the door, but as soon as she reached for the handle, she heard it. A soft knock. Her heart skipped a beat. Who could that be at this hour? Sarah opened the door to find no one standing there. She frowned, looking around the quiet yard. There was no sign of anyone. She was about to close the door when she heard a faint rustling sound coming from the bushes at the far end of the yard. Her curiosity piqued. She walked toward the sound, Max trailing closely behind her, his steps firm and purposeful. He seemed to know exactly where to go. When Sarah reached the bushes, she crouched down and gently pushed them aside. To her surprise, she found a small, trembling animal, a kitten. It was scared and alone, its fur dirty and matted. Sarah quickly picked it up, holding it gently in her arms. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered softly. Max stood by Sarah's side, looking at the kitten with calm eyes. He didn't bark, didn't make a sound. He simply stood there, as if waiting for Sarah to take care of it. Sarah felt a wave of gratitude toward Max. He had led her to this little kitten when she hadn't even known it was there. It was as if he had known that someone needed help, even though he couldn't see what was happening. She brought the kitten inside and set it up in a cozy spot, making sure it had food, water, and a warm blanket. Max watched her, his tail wagging gently. It was clear to Sarah that Max was proud of what he had done. He had sensed something that she hadn't, and in doing so, he had helped save a life. The next morning, Sarah took the kitten to the vet to make sure it was healthy. The vet confirmed that the kitten was only a few weeks old and had been abandoned. "It's a good thing you found her when you did," the vet said. "She was hungry and scared, but with care, she'll be just fine." Sarah smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. She had Max to thank for the discovery. It wasn't just that he had found the kitten, though. It was the way he had reacted, the way he had known that something needed to be done. It was almost as if Max had a sixth sense. His blindness didn't stop him from seeing what others couldn't. Over the next few days, Sarah and Max took turns looking after the kitten, who Sarah named Bella. Bella quickly grew stronger and more playful, and Sarah could see that Max had already formed a bond with the little creature. They would both sit together, watching Bella explore the house, their quiet presence a gentle reminder of how much they had all come to depend on each other. Max's actions that night left Sarah with a deep sense of wonder. She had always known that animals were special, but she had never imagined that Max, a blind dog, could have such an amazing connection to the world around him. He wasn't just surviving in his new life, he was thriving. Max had found a way to guide and protect, even without sight, and Sarah was more grateful than ever that he had come into her life. As she looked at Max and Bella together, Sarah realized that their story was still unfolding. There was more to discover, more to learn, and more lives to touch. But one thing was certain: Max's ability to sense and connect was something she would never take for granted. It was a gift, one that she was proud to share with him. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah couldn't help but feel more and more amazed by Max. It wasn't just that he had adjusted to his new life. It was the way he had found his place in it. Every day, he showed her just how capable he was, despite the challenges he faced. His blindness didn't stop him from being a loving, protective, and even helpful dog. Max's bond with Bella, the little kitten, grew stronger every day. It was like they understood each other in a special way. Max would lie beside Bella as she napped, his head resting near hers, a silent guardian. Bella, though small and fragile, seemed to know that Max was there to look after her. Whenever she got too curious and ventured too far from the safety of the couch or the bed, Max would gently nudge her back with his nose, guiding her without a single growl or bark. It was as though he had taken on the role of her protector, and Bella trusted him completely. One afternoon, Sarah was working in the garden when she noticed something unusual. Max, who was usually by her side or resting nearby, had wandered farther into the yard. She wasn't worried at first. He had become so familiar with the space that she trusted him to navigate it. But then she saw it. Max was standing still at the edge of the yard, staring intently at something. Sarah stood up, walking toward him. "Max," she called softly. But Max didn't move. He was focused on whatever it was in front of him. As Sarah got closer, she saw what Max had sensed before she did: a small, frightened bird, lying in the grass, unable to fly. Without a second thought, Max stepped forward, carefully approaching the bird. He didn't bark or make a noise. He simply crouched down, his body low to the ground, as if to protect it. Sarah knelt beside him, gently reaching for the bird. It was injured, one of its wings bent awkwardly. She picked it up carefully, cradling it in her hands. Max stayed close, his eyes soft as he watched Sarah. He didn't move, but his presence seemed to offer comfort. It was as though he knew the bird needed help, and that it was Sarah's job to give it. Sarah took the bird inside and set it up in a warm box, lining it with soft cloths and making sure it had enough space to rest. Max sat quietly beside the box, keeping an eye on the small creature. Every now and then, he would nudge the box gently with his nose, as if checking to make sure the bird was okay. The next few days were a blur of care for the injured bird. Sarah took it to the vet, where they discovered that its wing could be healed with a little time and care. Sarah was happy to know that the bird would be okay, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Max had somehow known it needed help before anyone else did. It was just like when he had found the kitten. He had an uncanny way of sensing when something was wrong. As the bird recovered, Max's quiet watchfulness continued. He never made a sound, but Sarah could see the way he stayed close, always nearby, as though he was guarding it. Eventually, the bird was strong enough to fly again. Sarah took it outside one morning, and with a little encouragement, the bird took off into the sky. Sarah smiled as she watched it fly away, feeling the sense of peace knowing that the bird was free once again. Max stood beside her, his ears perked up as he watched the bird disappear into the distance. He didn't chase it, didn't bark. He just stood still, calm, and content. Sarah looked down at him, her heart swelling with pride. "You did good, Max," she whispered. Max's ability to protect, to care, and to sense what others couldn't was becoming more clear every day. He wasn't just a blind dog. He was a guide, a protector, and a true friend. Max had a gift that Sarah had come to cherish deeply. And in his quiet, gentle way, Max was showing her that sometimes the greatest strength doesn't come from sight. It comes from the heart. Over time, Sarah realized that Max's purpose wasn't just to live in the world. It was to teach her how to see it differently. He had found his way, not by relying on his sight, but by using his other senses, his deep intuition, and his unshakable loyalty. With each passing day, Sarah felt more certain that she had rescued Max, but in reality, Max had rescued her in ways she never could have imagined. Their bond was stronger than ever, and Sarah knew that together, they could face anything. Max had proven that no matter the challenges, there was always a way forward, and she would always be there for him, just as he had been there for her. As summer began to fade into fall, Sarah and Max's life settled into a peaceful routine. Max continued to grow more confident, and the bond between him, Bella, and Sarah became unbreakable. It was clear that Max had found his place in Sarah's heart and home, and she couldn't imagine life without him. One afternoon, Sarah decided to take Max and Bella to the park. She had noticed how happy Max seemed whenever they went for walks, and she thought the open space of the park would be a nice change of pace for both him and Bella. She packed a small bag with treats, water, and a few toys, and together, they headed out the door. The park was only a short walk from Sarah's house, and when they arrived, Max immediately seemed to know where they were. His nose twitched as he inhaled the fresh air, and his ears perked up at the sounds of children playing and birds singing. He was relaxed, as if he had always known the park, even though he had never been there before. Sarah let Max and Bella explore the area. Bella chased after leaves and small twigs, while Max calmly walked beside Sarah, his steps sure and steady. He seemed to enjoy the freedom of the open space, sniffing around, his tail wagging gently as he walked along the path. Sarah kept a close eye on him, but Max didn't need much guidance. He knew the ground beneath his feet and the sounds around him. The park was as much his home as her house was. As they continued down the path, Sarah noticed a small group of people gathered near a bench. A woman, with a worried expression on her face, was sitting on the ground, looking at something in her hands. Sarah's curiosity piqued, and she walked toward the group, Max by her side. As they got closer, she could see that the woman was holding a small dog in her lap, its eyes wide with fear. The dog was trembling, its fur dirty and matted. It looked like it had been lost for a while. The woman was speaking to it softly, trying to calm it down, but the dog was clearly scared and confused. Sarah's heart went out to the little dog, and she immediately knelt down beside the woman. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently. The woman looked up, her eyes filled with concern. "I found him wandering around the park. I don't know what to do," she said. "He's so scared. I can't seem to comfort him." Max, who had been walking calmly beside Sarah, suddenly stopped. He turned his head toward the small dog and took a few slow steps in its direction. Sarah noticed the change in him. There was something different in his stance, something protective. The woman looked at Max, unsure of what to expect. "Do you think your dog will be okay with him?" she asked. Sarah nodded. "Max is very gentle," she said, looking at her blind dog with pride. "He's good with other animals." Max approached the frightened dog slowly, his movements calm and measured. He stopped just a few feet away, his head tilted as he listened to the soft whimpers of the small dog. Sarah watched as Max stood still for a moment, as if considering how to help. Then, without warning, Max took a few more steps forward and gently nudged the small dog with his nose. The small dog jumped at the touch, but Max didn't back away. He stayed there, still and patient, offering his quiet presence. The trembling dog stopped shaking for a moment, looking up at Max with curiosity. Max didn't bark or jump around. He simply stayed calm, allowing the dog to come to him on its own terms. Sarah could see the change in the small dog's eyes. Slowly, it stopped trembling. The woman's face softened as she watched the interaction. "He's calming down," she whispered in surprise. Max stayed close, letting the dog sniff him, while Sarah gently spoke to the woman. "I think he just needs a little time." Animals have a way of understanding each other, even when we don't know how. Max didn't leave the dog's side, and after a few minutes, the small dog had stopped shaking completely. It had started to nudge Max back, its tail wagging slowly. Sarah smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. Max had done it again. He had helped another creature in need, even though he couldn't see. Eventually, the woman was able to pick up the small dog, cradling it gently in her arms. "Thank you," she said to Sarah. "I don't know what would have happened without your dog. He's so special." Sarah smiled and patted Max. "He's amazing," she said, her heart swelling with pride. "I'm glad he could help." The woman walked away, the small dog now calm in her arms, and Sarah turned to Max. "You did it again, didn't you, buddy?" she whispered, giving him a loving scratch behind the ears. Max looked up at her, his face soft and calm, and Sarah knew that he had truly found his purpose. He was more than just a dog. He was a healer, a protector, and a friend. His blindness had never stopped him from making a difference in the world, and Sarah knew that together they would continue to help others, one small act of kindness at a time. The leaves had turned a warm orange and red, signaling that fall was in full swing. Sarah, Max, and Bella were enjoying the change in season. The days were crisp and cool, perfect for long walks and spending time outside. Max, despite his blindness, was thriving in his new life, and Sarah was grateful for every moment they spent together. But as peaceful as their days were, a new challenge was on the horizon, one that would test not only Max's strength, but also the deep bond he shared with Sarah. It started as a normal morning, with Sarah getting ready to head out for their usual walk. Max and Bella were excited, as they always were, and Sarah couldn't wait to enjoy the fresh air with her two best friends. But just as they were about to leave, Sarah noticed something strange. There was a large truck parked outside her house. It was blocking the driveway, and Sarah could see a couple of men unloading equipment. She walked outside, curious. "Excuse me," she called out to one of the men. "What's going on?" The man turned and smiled, tipping his hat. "We're here to cut down that big tree in your yard," he said, pointing to the tall oak tree near the back fence. "It's been leaning a bit too much. We think it's becoming a hazard." Sarah's heart sank. She had always loved that tree. It had been there for as long as she could remember, providing shade and shelter for so many animals. She never imagined it might have to come down. "I understand, but I'm worried about Max," she said, glancing back at her dog. The man looked at Max, who was standing calmly by Sarah's side. "He should be fine, Mom," the man reassured her. "We'll be careful, but the noise might scare him." Sarah nodded, feeling uneasy. Max was used to some noises, but loud sounds like chainsaws and trucks could be overwhelming. She didn't want to put him in a situation where he felt frightened or stressed. "Can I keep him inside while you work?" she asked. "Of course," the man said. "We'll do our best to finish quickly." Sarah agreed, but as the workers began their task, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Max, who had always been so calm and confident, might find the noise unsettling. She decided to keep him in the house, where he would be safe and away from the commotion. Bella, curious and energetic as always, followed Sarah inside as she closed the door behind them. For the next few hours, the noise from the truck and chainsaw filled the air. Sarah kept an eye on Max, who had curled up in his favorite spot on the rug. His ears were twitching every now and then as the sounds of the workers continued, but he didn't seem to panic. Still, Sarah couldn't help but worry. She knew that Max had already overcome so much in his life, but the loud noise was something new, something he hadn't experienced before. Around midday, the noise suddenly stopped. Sarah peeked out the window and saw the men finishing up their work, the tree now cut down in large pieces. The truck was getting ready to leave. Sarah let out a sigh of relief, thinking the worst was over. But as she turned to check on Max, she noticed something unexpected. He was standing up, his tail straight, and his body tense. His ears were pointing forward, listening intently. Sarah could feel the change in him. Something wasn't right. Before Sarah could react, Max walked toward the door, his steps measured and calm. He wasn't running in fear, but he wasn't acting like his usual self either. It was as if he was searching for something. "Max," Sarah called softly, confused by his behavior. "Where are you going?" Max stopped just in front of the door and turned his head towards Sarah, his eyes calm but determined. He gently bumped the door with his nose, a quiet signal that he wanted to go outside. Sarah hesitated for a moment, But then she opened the door. To her surprise, Max stepped outside without hesitation. He walked toward the spot where the tree had once stood. The workers were gone, but there were large pieces of the tree scattered across the yard. Max sniffed the air, his nose twitching as he took in the new smells of freshly cut wood. Sarah followed him outside, watching closely. "Max, what are you doing?" she whispered. Max stopped at the base of the tree, his body still, as if he was searching for something. He moved toward a pile of branches, gently sniffing around each one. It was as though he knew exactly what had happened. Even though he hadn't seen the tree fall, he understood that something had changed. After a few minutes, Max stepped back and turned toward Sarah, his tail wagging slowly. He had found what he was looking for, a small, frightened squirrel that had been hiding in the branches of the fallen tree. The squirrel was curled up in a tight ball, clearly scared by the noise and commotion of the tree being cut down. Despite his blindness, Max had always found a way to live each day to the fullest. His sense of adventure had never faded, and his loving nature had only grown stronger with time. Sarah's heart swelled with pride every time she saw Max do something amazing, like guiding Bella back to safety or calming the nervous squirrel. He had a way of making everything around him feel safer, kinder, and more hopeful. One cold evening, after a long day of playing outside and enjoying the crisp winter air, Sarah and Max sat together on the couch. Bella curled up on Sarah's lap, and Max lay on the rug, his head resting on his paws. The soft sound of the wind outside filled the room, and the gentle warmth of the fire made everything feel peaceful. Max had grown older over the past few months, and Sarah had noticed small changes. He no longer ran around as much as he used to, and his steps seemed slower. But even as time passed, his spirit remained as strong as ever. He was always there for Sarah, always by her side, offering his love and protection. One night, Sarah woke up to find Max standing at the edge of her bed, his ears perked up and his head turned toward her. He wasn't whining or barking. He was simply waiting. There was a quiet understanding in his gaze, as though he knew it was time for something. Sarah, still half asleep, reached down to pat his head. "Max," she whispered, rubbing his ears. "What is it, boy?" Max didn't move, but his presence felt comforting, like he was telling her everything would be okay. Sarah slowly got out of bed and followed him down the hallway to the living room. Max led her to the spot by the fireplace, where he stopped and sat down. Sarah kneeled beside him, feeling an overwhelming sense of love and gratitude. She had always known that Max had a special way of communicating with her, but tonight it felt different. She could see it in his eyes. He was ready to rest. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she hugged him close. "I love you so much, Max," she whispered. "You've been my best friend, my protector, my hero. I'll never forget all the good times we shared." Max leaned his head against her chest, and for a moment, everything felt still. There was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet bond between them. Sarah held him for as long as she could, knowing that soon they would face a difficult goodbye. The next morning, Max seemed a little slower than usual. He moved carefully, but his tail wagged softly when Sarah greeted him. He still had that calm, gentle presence, but it was clear that age was taking its toll. Sarah decided it was time to take him to the vet to make sure he was comfortable. The vet confirmed what Sarah had feared. Max's body was starting to give out. His age, combined with his blindness, had made everything a bit harder for him. But even then, the vet smiled at Max, who remained calm and loving, his eyes still filled with that special spark. "It's clear he's lived a full and happy life," the vet said gently. "Max is a remarkable dog. You've both been lucky to have each other." Sarah smiled through her tears. "I couldn't have asked for a better dog." That night, Sarah sat with Max in the living room, just like they had done so many times before. She held his paw and whispered stories of their adventures together. How they had found the kitten, how Max had rescued the squirrel, how he had been there for her through every good and bad moment. Max seemed to listen, his eyes soft and loving. She knew that the time they had left together was limited, but she also knew that their bond would never fade. Max had given her more than she could ever repay. He had taught her about unconditional love, the power of courage, and the importance of kindness. He had shown her that no matter the challenges, there was always room for love, for hope, and for second chances. Max, though aging, still had that quiet strength. He still had the love in his heart for Sarah and Bella. And as the night passed, Sarah held him close, knowing that this was not the end. It was simply another chapter in their beautiful story. The next morning, Max took one last walk outside. He walked slowly but with purpose, sniffing the air, feeling the ground beneath him, and enjoying every moment. Then, as the sun began to set, Max lay down on his favorite spot on the rug, his eyes closing gently. Sarah sat beside him, her hand resting on his fur, and she whispered, "I'll always love you, Max. You will always be a part of me." Max's tail gave one last gentle wag before he closed his eyes for the final time. But even as he passed, Sarah knew that his spirit would live on in her heart and in every loving memory they had shared. Max had come into her life as a blind dog with a troubled past, but he had given her everything: his heart, his courage, and his love. And that love would last forever.